Hey, it's Tim here. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the new Tableau Certified Data Analyst beta exam. Now, this actually came out a few days ago. I got an email from Tableau that was sent out to everyone who's on their mailing list. And essentially, it was offering an offer, if that makes sense. Essentially, if you sit the beta exam, you can do the exam for a slightly reduced rate. But there's a couple of catches, though. The beta exam itself will take a period of time to assess. You're essentially going to be willingly putting yourself through a slightly longer exam because it's a beta, and also sort of doing questions that won't necessarily count towards the final assessment. But what they're trying to do is collect a pool of results, and then from there, they're going to make a judgment on what the final exam should look like. So I thought I'd give it a go. I signed up yesterday and I sat it this morning. I'm literally just half an hour away since I finished the exam, so I'm trying to do a first impression just to give you an idea of what to expect in the exam. I'm only going to be using the exam prep guide. I can't obviously show you anything in the exam itself other than the procedures to set up and stuff that comes before the exam, and so I did sort of capture a bit of that. But nonetheless, let's go into the exam prep guide and have a look at it, because I think it's actually super important to pay attention to this guide because it does actually have all the detail that you need. This is one of the first exams to cover a range of skills. I'll just go ahead and call it out that you do need to have at least 6 months experience with Tableau Desktop, Tableau Prep, and Tableau Server or Tableau Online. This is one of the first exams to test the whole entire architecture. And the way they do that is they've broken it down into domains. So if I just skip a bunch of the guide here and I go right down to the bottom, you'll see that the domains are split out in these proportions. Now, having sat the exam, what I can say to you is just round these up to the nearest whole percentage. And that's probably a much fairer reflection of how much of the exam those questions are going to take. So for example, domain 1, I'd just call that 25%. Domain 2, just call that 50%. Domain 3, call that 25%. And the final one, this one's only got 10% of the exam, but to be honest with you, it felt like I wasn't really asked the question in this particular domain because there was so few questions on it. So call it 10% in terms of how you rationalize how you're going to learn this. But in essence, you could almost sit the exam without not knowing much about domain 4 and technically still pass it. The reason that is because the pass mark is 750 out of 1,000, essentially 75%. And so if you look at these percentages here, you can see that, well, if you scored 90%, you'd be perfectly fine. But it's not as simple as that. So let's get into the detail of this exam. Let's first start on talking about the structure of the exam. Okay, so here on screen, I have the paragraph on exam structure, and this is so important. It's broken down into 3 sections: one multiple choice section, one hands-on section, and then another multiple choice section. Now, the reason they're done like that, I think, is to create a bit of time pressure. Essentially, you can't sort of go to the end of the exam, go through, blitz through everything, and then go back and redo the questions you weren't sure of. Essentially, you got to make sure you spend just enough time on the first section, which is, I think, it doesn't say the exact number, but I think in my exam, it was probably around 35 to 40 questions in the first section. Then you had the middle section, which was a hands-on section, which kind of got you to go through several tasks. Then you had the final batch of sections, which was around 15 to 20 questions. I can't remember off the top of my head. But nonetheless, this was really, really sort of interesting because it forces you to mark that section complete. And once you've done that, you can't go back. So it's actually called out here. It's called out in pretty clear detail that is what's going on. And so time management is important. Now, the difference with this exam compared to what I think the final exam will be like is that this is a beta exam. So there's more questions in there, and the exam is probably longer than it ought to be. It's probably been designed to be longer so they can test a broader pool of questions. And so it shouldn't necessarily be used as a reflection of how long you'll have in the final exam. But nonetheless, if you're going to take the beta, just be aware that the total time you get, which is roughly 2.5 hours, needs to be spread across 3 sections. And depending on your skill set, you might actually find that you have a slightly unusual split between these sections. For me, I personally found the hands-on section the easiest because the products are right in front of you. You're being asked a very simple question and there's a clear task involved. With the other multiple choice sections, it gets a little bit more tricky, and I'll explain why in this next bit. So you can see we have different types of questions being asked, and there's actually quite a lot going on here. And it's really important to make sure you pay attention to the mechanics of the question. I sort of wish we had a little bit of a trial of these mechanics so that we could just go through these advanced and get through them rather than having to spend time in the exam figuring them out. But again, the beta is longer than it ought to be, so you should be fine sort of figuring things out. In the exam, I noticed that because I have a large screen, the exam would load the question in the top portion of the screen, creating a scroll bar. Essentially, what that would then mean is I wouldn't be able to see the whole question. And it took me a while to realize that I didn't have to scroll. There's actually a little slider in the middle of the view that you can slide down, and that enables you to see the whole question in one go. That's kind of important because sometimes you don't want to be sort of scrolling up and down, getting the context of the question correct. So just bear that in mind. Do try and drag that little slider down so you can see the whole question. Then in the bottom half or on the right-hand side, depending on the question type, you have the space to answer the question. Now, build lists are really cool types of questions. Essentially, on the left, you have a list of options. And on the right, you have to put it into the right order and choose the right options in the right order. So this exam really does test your ability to recall how to do something without the product in front of you. That's something that's not really been tested before because you've always had access to things like the documentation and also the internet. This exam has no access to the internet. You can't go out on the internet and search things. The only resource you have is actually the fact that you have access to the documentation. So if I go down here, we can see access to materials. You can see that access to the internet or any other outside application is prohibited during the exam. But in the hands-on sections, candidates will have access to the PDF version of Tableau Help during this section of the exam. Okay, so that's all you have access to. You can go out and search things in the help document, but you can't really go out to the internet. And so it's really important to sort of just make sure that when you prepare for this exam, sort of really try and make sure that you can visualize your journey through the product without having the product in front of you. I don't really know a good way of doing this other than making sure you've had 6 months of experience, because once you've had 6 months of experience, it should be fresh in your mind. But you can also suffer from this other problem, which I think I experienced a little bit today, which is I've used Tableau for 5 years. So some of what I do is just second nature. I actually don't consciously think through the steps I'm going through. I see a question and I just start doing stuff. It's sort of hard to explain, but you just subconsciously know what to do, how to do it, and how to get the end result. But you don't necessarily pay attention to the exact steps you took to get there because you just know how to achieve the end result. And so this exam does require you to be able to recall those steps. You can't just sort of blow through something without being able to recall it in the way they set up the questions. Now, if you don't know the answer every time, that's fine, because normally what you can do is you can choose the right one from the options that are there. So using the process of deduction, you can figure out what the right answer is. There are these things called detractors, which are deliberately designed to sort of lead you off the path. And then there are also essentially sometimes with a multiple choice question, let's say there's 4 answers, you'll get one that's correct, one that's nearly correct but not quite correct, and then you'll get 2 which are just flat out wrong but could sound correct. And so the questions are designed in that way to kind of challenge you a little bit and make sure that they're all friendly. But nonetheless, again, this is a beta, so this could all change. And so yeah, these are the different exam types. I really liked it because I think for once I felt like I was actually being challenged on the really small aspects of Tableau, all the way from, you know, finishing off calculations, table calculations, how to set up different sort of chart types and make sure that they were showing the correct sets of values, how to manipulate the marks pane. This is all covered in this this sort of domain guide here at the bottom. And I think they're actually correct in this list. Sometimes you never really know, well, how in-depth am I going to need to understand these things? And to be honest with you, I think you just got to bear in mind what are the things you're most likely to have used in the first 6 months of using Tableau in each of these areas, right? So you can see here they talk about fixed LODs, but they don't talk about the other level of detail calculations. That's maybe for a more pro exam. And as you go through this list, you can see there's a whole range of different things. And so I would actually make sure you're comfortable working with all of these. Of course, I've got videos on some of this in my channel, and there are other people who've created lots of great content on some of this other stuff as well. So be sure to check out that content on YouTube. But more or less, this domain guide is actually, I think, fairly quite thorough. Having seen the exam and having done the exam, I can confidently say that this list is a good list to make sure you go through and you can understand, at least in a mental model, how to do all these things. And so, yeah, literally, this guide is actually surprisingly, well, it shouldn't be surprised because Tableau do put a lot of effort into their guides, but it's actually a really good sort of context for the exam, and it's a really good thing to study before the exam. One last thing I will say about the beta exam is that it takes a long time to get your results. So you can see here, candidates will receive their score at least 90 days after the beta period for the exam closes. So the exam is open for a short period of time, then the beta will close, and then you'll get your results 90 days after that. So might not get my results until January at this rate, because if you sort of do the timings and you sort of figure it out, we're basically into Christmas. And so I shouldn't really expect a result this year, but nonetheless, I thought I'd still do a video just to sort of walk through the mechanics of the exam and show you some of the things that you should be aware of. Now, of course, this exam is managed by Pearson VUE. Hopefully in this video, I've already gone through the process of setting all of that up and going through that. But you can see it's a very sort of simple process. And, you know, I much prefer the Pearson VUE setup for the exam than I did the previous exam provider, because I think the Pearson VUE setup not only provides for home delivery, so in the remote world we sort of have to live in sometimes, you can do this test at home, and they have a good way of proctoring the exam. They can actually load a virtual environment in the browser, which was also available in the exam today. So yeah, just make sure you go through all the prerequisites, all the tests and everything, and make sure that you set all of that up, and the exam should go fairly well. So yeah, let me know what you think of the beta. I've pretty much summarized all the key things that sort of pulled out of my head that I wanted to talk about. Obviously can't talk about the exact questions I sat, that's not allowed according to the exam rules. But if you go to this guide and you work through it and you make sure you read it in full, you shouldn't be surprised by anything you get in the exam. And more importantly, you'll actually know what the exams are like. Now, one thing I will do is try and see if we can get a more public example of what these question types are, because I think it's one thing reading them, but it's another thing seeing them. So maybe I'm going to try and see if we can persuade Tableau to create a video, maybe a video on the certification pages that shows you the different types of questions that they might be using once this beta has ended, because of course it is a beta exam, so they might decide not to use some of these question types altogether. So I think once they settle on that exam, there probably will be some exam readiness content from Tableau to help you sort of get familiar with the exam. I did this a lot. I actually left a lot of comments in the exam where I thought the answer that I thought was correct was also simultaneously vague, or where the question could have been worded better. I also left comments about the experience as I went through it. For example, me discovering that you could scroll things around halfway through the exam. I didn't think that would be obvious for some people, so I put that comment in there. But everything else is, I think, pretty tight. I think this is a really good format for the exam. I know for a lot of people, doing a Tableau exam without access to Tableau and without access to the internet is a change in the way things work. But again, I will say this, most other technology tools have been doing this for quite some time, and I think it's appropriate for Tableau to raise the bar and make sure that their exams are done at the same standard, because otherwise you look at a Tableau certification versus, let's say, a Power BI certification, especially this exam, which is typically labeled for the analyst, you want to be able to have these skills and certifications at a comparable level. And so I think they're just sort of falling in line with the rest of the industry. And so we should be comfortable with that, and we should really sort of rise to that challenge. But again, if you've been using Tableau for 6 months, this shouldn't really be a problem. You just have to make sure that you work through your mental models when you revise. Okay, so it's the day before the exam. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my exam dashboard. I'm going to hit the Tableau Certified Data Analyst beta link here, and that will pull up this page. You need to run this system twice, once before the exam, and then it's actually going to run again during your exam to make sure that everything meets up. So they sort of double check it essentially. So I'm going to click run a system test, and you get to this page. Now I'm on a Mac, so it's definitely worth doing this in advance, because sometimes you have to give this particular application access to run. Essentially, it needs access to your microphone, camera, automation, and input monitoring to make sure you're not sort of using any support or any assistance from someone else or some other system on your machine. So to do this test, you simply go to this page, you copy the access code, you download the software. This software downloads to your machine. I'll overwrite the existing one that I've got here. And essentially your code is unique to you. So you can't use one that someone has given you. You need to make sure you use your code. Because I'm on a Mac, I'm just going to download this. It might look slightly different on the Windows, but essentially it should do exactly the same thing. I'm going to unzip it. And when we unzip it, you should see the application is what's inside of that folder. It's it's a really big application, 725 megabytes. I have a fast internet, so that downloaded reasonably fast at 189 meg, and then it unzips to be almost 1 gig. I don't know what could possibly be so large. It kind of makes me suspicious, but nonetheless, let's double click it, open it. It's coming from a trusted source, so we'll go with it. And when you open it, you will see this notification. It says, hey, you've downloaded this application. It's coming from OnView, who's the exam provider. Click open, and you should get a full screen window like this. Now, the code you want to get, I always make sure I paste it again. It should already have copied it from your clipboard, but you just want to make sure you paste it and get your exact code, hit next, and then what it will start to do is run a system test. So if we start the microphone check, it will ask you for access to your microphone. And you can see here that I'm speaking through my microphone. It's got my default microphones correctly set up, so that's all working nicely. We can start a speaker check. We heard the speakers, so that works. And then the webcam check, it's going to connect to my standard webcam, ask for permission as well. In this case, I have got my, this is a sort of Elgato cam link. Now it's saying that it's working because I've actually got the camera off. So if I was to switch this on, it's technically working. So you can see I'm waving there inside of the webcam. So everything is working great, and I can hit next. And that access code, I think they're able to actually validate that you've run the test before the exam. So if we hit next, it will then do a network connection. And so I think what this software does, it does send the test results back to the test center so they can see if you've run this or not prior to the exam. So that's why I say do it the day before. You want to get it done. You don't want to be asked to have to do it before the exam. Network connection is fine, so network test is all good. We're currently downloading your exam files. This is just a test. The exam is ready. Click the next button. And then minimize the risk of disruption by following the instructions below. And basically, you can go through this whole process. So if you hit next, it's basically going to say, okay, your exam simulation is done. But in the real exam, it will take over your machine and you'll go full screen and you're basically in the exam. Okay. So once we launch the simulation, you'll see that it asks for permission, and it asks for quite a few things. So it's essentially replaces one of my keys with an automation. So you've completed test your system. Congrats. Now it's opening everything that it closed again. Get ready on exam day. Make sure you prepare your testing space and don't forget to bring acceptable government ID. If your testing space, computer and or internet change prior to exam day, we suggest running a system test again to avoid any issues on exam day. So I'm going to hit close. And that should be the end of the simulation. So it's opened up every single app that I had shut, which is sort of frustrating. It's even closed my browser. So you can see it's got a pretty, full-on control of your machine. So if you're not comfortable with that, then you have to go do the exam in a test center. So that's your only options pretty much. So get your exam done in a test center, or basically let them have full control of what's going on. So you can see it's even logged me out of the page. So let me go back to the home page for Tableau and Pearson VUE, hit sign in, log in again. And if I click on my exam, it won't say that you've done the system test already. But if you've done it once, that's fine. Your exam simulation is all ready to go and you're ready. So my check-in time tomorrow is 8:30. Start time is 9 o'clock. Half an hour is a lot of time, but it allows for any issues that might pop up. They do inspect your environment as well. So they will ask you to take your webcam and turn it around and show them the room. I encourage, if you're in a room with a lot of technology, be sure to unplug and switch everything off as much as you possibly can. You don't need to move everything out of the room, but you do need to make sure you're ready for the exam. The exam length is 150 minutes. So I'm kind of curious how that works, because that's a long amount of time. So that's almost 2.5 hours for this exam, and I think some of that includes check-in and stuff like that. So we should sort of wait and see how this works. But other than that, be sure to read everything they ask you to do. So it does say before the exam day, do the following tests. Make sure you have everything ready. Make sure you have your ID. They have a list of what works. And yeah, on exam day, good luck. And the next bit of this video will talk about the actual exam itself. And hopefully by this point, I should have sat the exam so I can talk firsthand. So that's pretty much it. That's all I have to really say about this. When we get the results back, I don't know if I've passed or not. So I could be doing this video and I failed. If you do fail a certification, check out my other video on failing certifications. I'm really hoping I don't need that video myself. So once this exam is settled and once it's all done, then we will do a proper video on how to get ready for it. What I will also start to do is I'll probably start to make content on each of these areas ahead of time, so that by the time it's live, what we can do is release a certification playlist for this particular certification. If you've got other videos on certification you'd like me to do, let me know. Just for the record, I won't do a video on a certification that isn't currently available, because essentially I won't be able to set it. And likewise, I'm also due to set certain certifications in the future. So Tableau Server certifications, I'm due to basically renew all of that next year. So I won't make any videos between now and then, because simply there's just no point until the new exams and the new setup have been released. Those are currently sort of offline at the moment. So it doesn't make sense to do that content now until everything's been updated. But I just thought, again, I'd do this quick video just to show you through this guide and walk you through it. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this, you know what to do. Be sure to check out all the other videos on 2021.3 that I'm currently going through. Having a bit of issue setting up Slack, so that's why that video is not out yet. But nonetheless, I'll catch you in the next one.